have any friends that do weed. I also don't. But there was this one time where I went to a family friend's house and we were all just together. She was much older and then she was just smoking, but we don't really pay attention to it. Much younger. I think it was like 2 years ago. Yeah. So it's definitely weird.
I've experienced weed a couple of times. On some occasions it was great, either smoked or ingested. But then also had some rough experiences with it. And then I have a couple of friends that have done it and do it on a regular basis. And they seem to quite enjoy it.
I've been around people who've tried it before, because I try not judging people against what they're doing. What I try doing is I help them right instead of judging them, because it's just gonna make the situation worse if you judge them.
I've never had weed. I'm pretty closed environment to weed. I haven't ever had it, but I know people who do it, and very close to me people that do it, and they seem to have a bit of a chill out moment with it. And I haven't seen people having bad experiences with weed, but I have heard about people having bad experiences with weed, definitely. Yeah.
It's, for me personally, it's not good personally, because let me say, a lot of my friends, they smoke weed. So like they smoke weed and they try to like put me in their there's like a lot of peer pressure. You have to have a lot of faith, you have to stay confident and at least say no. And then it's hard sometimes to say no, and it's not good actually. It's not, weed is totally not good. High, they'll start doing things that are not good, and then they're like totally out of their way. So weed, it actually, if you're like running away from your problems, and then you go to weed, you're not necessarily realizing that weed will make you do things that are actually totally wrong.
I've experienced weed probably like I'm not a regular smoker, but probably two times a year I would say I smoke weed. I mean, the times I smoked weed, it's when you start getting into high, it's great, but then you sort of want to start to get off it and you can't, which is what annoys me about it. And that's why I don't really partake in it a lot, because you don't have much control when you're in a high, and therefore you have to wait for the high to just come down, and then you'll be out of it. But the fact that I like to be in control just makes me not want to do a lot of weed.
Good evening, everyone, and once again, welcome to Hot Topics. We're really excited to have you joining us as we wrap up our How Far is Too Far series. It's been an interesting journey, and we sincerely hope that you've enjoyed it as much as we have. But before we stop the series, before we finish the series, we actually have another conversation tonight, and that is on the topic of weed. And so we are quite excited to be speaking about this. Weed, cannabis, sometimes called marijuana, so there's lots of different names for it. That one as well. My name is Ilse, and I'm one of your hosts for tonight, and then we've got my co-host, Hloni, over here, and we've got some exciting guests lined up for you tonight. So I'm going to ask them just to quickly introduce themselves to us.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Simpiwe Mthembu. I'm serving at Kempton Park Methodist Church, but also I serve as a Connectional Youth Director and Children in our connection, the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. Yes, and I'm quite excited to be here and looking forward to discuss with you this quite interesting topic this evening. Thank you.
Dr. Christine Nadler. I'm a senior lecturer at UNISA, and I'm a clinical psychologist. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're really excited to have you on our panel tonight as we kind of try and tackle and explore this wild and unexplored topic often, I think. So as we kick off the conversation tonight, I would like to start with a statement that I've often heard people make around weed, if we're comfortable calling it that, or cannabis. So often people refer to it and they say it's a gateway drug. And I'd love for us to, from our different professional opinions, just to unpack what does that mean, why is it often called that? And some people even say that they disagree with the statement. What is it about this statement and this substance that causes people to disagree so vastly on it?
The for many people, they use weed to like kind of open up their mind, you know, like when you just start thinking a lot. But I don't know, I'm not really the same because I don't do weed.
I think that for some people it can be. I think there's a couple of people that struggle with certain things. So in a sense, some people have an addictive personality.
But then it depends on yourself. It depends on how you feel about other things. If you feel that if you try weed for the first time and you feel that, okay, this is too light for me, I need to try something heavier, it depends on you. If you feel that, okay, you're aiming at weed, or maybe just not doing it.
I can actually agree with that, because a lot of my friends, you know, at the hood, we have a lot of friends, and then some of them, they are depressed, they are going through some stuff, and so they're trying to run away from their problems at home, and then they run away from those drugs, at least to escape from their problems. So I can say, yeah, it's a gateway drug, Mara. At the end, it will end up damaging them inside up until they will notice that the weed is not actually working for them.
You look at the addictive part of weed, but at the same time, weed has two characteristics. I mean, if you look at the addictive side and the medical side, I'm sure with medicine, I don't see weed as being addictive, but if you use it as a drug, yeah, I would agree with that it can be a gateway to other things.
To answer that question, I think it's just a sorry excuse to say, let's do drugs, in other words. Because I feel like that's not the only way you could get out of your problem, since they say it's a gateway drug, because it sort of helps you to escape, so to speak. I haven't ever done it before, so I don't know. But people that I know of, I actually have friends who smoke. So they say it helps you unwind and relax, and it helps you forget about the world's problems. But I wouldn't really recommend it. Yeah, I think it's true actually, because obviously the more you do it is the more it's obviously going to embed itself within your system, obviously. And so while doing it, you try to find something much more stronger, since obviously its effects would be less induced, isn't it? So you'll try to get something much more stronger, something much more potent. So yeah.
Having had experience with weed myself, it does allow you to think and go to spaces that you probably wouldn't have done naturally yourself. As it being a gateway, yes, I think it does allow you to access your mind and specific aspects that you wouldn't have in an ordinary setting.
It's true to a certain extent, but it's not a definite statement. So what I understand when people say it's a gateway drug, generally speaking, people don't, or it's generally, obviously there's always exceptions to the rule, don't necessarily start with heroin and cocaine. They generally start with a more mild, or what is perceived as a more mild drug. So hence, cannabis is seen as almost tame, which is not necessarily true. And then they say once you start with dacha, then you will progress onto more lethal or more dangerous drugs. That's not always true, because the effects of cannabis can be just as lethal or as problematic as, for example, cocaine or heroin. So I can see why they say it's a gateway. It's the beginning of your journey in narcotics, for example. And the thing is that when you are smoking dacha, or when you are smoking a drug or taking a drug, you can take it many different ways, you will be exposed to other people that are taking different drugs. So that is why it's sort of seen as, you may think to yourself, I'm smoking dacha by myself or just with my closest friends away from the culture of drugs, but this is not necessarily always the case. So in my understanding, it's half true. It is true for some people's journey into narcotics, and it's not true for every single person. Some people literally smoke cannabis, or they take cannabis and that's all they ever take. Others will say, I started with cannabis and I ended up with heroin or crystal meth or so forth. So that's how I understand the statement. So for me, it has some validity.
Yeah. No, for me, I think the point of departure when I was thinking about the subject itself is how do you look at the weed itself? You can look at it as a herb, which is something that could be positive, and you can look at it as a drug. So I do agree with you that, like any other thing, from my point of view, that has a potential to make you addicted to something. So itself, if you use it, you get addicted. It ends up controlling you. It then becomes a gateway to do some other things or take other drugs. And also from what I've observed when I was growing up with some of the people that I grew up with who were using it, some they really didn't become drug addicts. They just use it. There was one guy who was very good in maths, and it was they believed that it was because he was using it. So others then they get to mix it with other things. I think we'll get into that later. But for me, it as a gateway, it basically depends on the purpose of why you're using it. If you are looking at it as a herb, if you are using it as a drugs, then you get addicted, then you get hooked up to many other forms of drugs.
Simple, I think you're mentioning something, and I have a privilege of having maybe engaged with both you and Christine to a certain level around this particular topic. And I would just want to hear from you, just picking up from that, the whole idea of it being a gateway. I know that I've spoken to youth workers who say, I've allowed maybe a teenager to kind of use it because it helps them manage with the anxiety. I would be keen to hear your heart around that, Christine. When someone says, and I remember, in actual fact, even when we hosted one of the speakers, there were people who came in to say, we disagree with you because it has helped me with my anxiety, and I feel like it's a better place to be in, to be high, than to be anxious. I mean, and to be, to feel the way my anxiety makes me feel. And I know, Simpiwe, that you are very passionate. At some point, a couple of years ago, you hosted something around no holiness without social holiness, and the whole idea of the Methodist Church starting rehab centers, etc. And when it comes to how can you locate weed within that narrative, and just also picking up on what I've asked Christine to say, is it okay for people to use it for stuff such as their anxiety and stuff like that?
Well, from a psychiatric and a psychological perspective, so I'm a psychologist, so I would look at, there are many ways to manage anxiety that is monitored. And when I hear people saying that they want to use cannabis or dacha and it reduces their anxiety, my major concern is that it's not monitored. So there's no one checking that this is the case. There's no one saying we are checking that indeed it is actually assisting you or not. My other major, what other people don't talk about is that cannabis can actually make somebody go psychotic, which is a severe mental disorder. And no one talks about that. No one talks about the risk. And that is one of the most important things to be aware of. Any substance that you take can affect your brain chemistry and your brain functioning in ways that we cannot fully predict. So for one person, you can take a substance and it's not going to lead to fallouts, like mental health fallouts. For another person, they can take it once. They can take cannabis once. They can go psychotic and never come back from psychosis. So they end up being having a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Also, some people can take dacha consistently and it doesn't really affect their performance, right? So for example, like the person you mentioned, he's saying it actually helped him. Whether it did objectively, we don't know. It's also the subjective experience is different to the actual experience. What we found, and it's interesting where the research comes from. The research actually comes from the Netherlands, predominantly, some of the best research. And why it's ironic is because they make dacha. You can walk into a cafe and have dacha. It's been legalized for a long time. And they've done research on young adolescents that have taken cannabis for a long time. So they start, let's say, for example, at 15, and they're smoking dacha. And by the time they reach their young adulthood, they are not functioning in society. And the way that we understand that psychologically, particularly with cannabis, is what they call the amotivational syndrome, which means that the person loses the motivation to do normal tasks that are expected of them. For example, go to class, go to work. And this you don't pick up when they're 15, you pick it up when they're 20. So what happens is there's long-term effects to using cannabis. So there's, for example, cognitive difficulties, thinking difficulties, executive difficulties. They're not managing their life. They're not planning. They're not organizing. They're not goal-directed. So in other words, they're not normal functioning members of society. And that is underreported. So people are only picking it up 5 years into the use of cannabis, that this, for example, this young man isn't performing like his peers. He hasn't got a job, or he hasn't gone to university, or he dropped out in his first year of university because he was spending each day actually smoking cannabis by himself, isolated, withdrawn. And it doesn't start out that way, but it ends up that way. So those are my two major concerns is, yes, it potentially subjectively could help with anxiety, but objectively, there's symptoms that the doctor's saying the person went psychotic, or the person is developing the amotivational syndrome. What the Netherlands researchers found is it has a kindling effect. Literally, they call it the kindling effect, like when you start a fire. We don't know our genetics. It's not like we go and we say to someone, please tell me my whole genetic tree. So we don't know who in our family tree, going however far back, had mental health difficulties, because people don't like talking about people that have ended up in a psychiatric hospital, or, in the community not functioning. People don't necessarily talk about it. So a young person doesn't know that there's a genetic vulnerability in their family. They can go and smoke cannabis like their friend has been doing for 2 years, not realizing that in their genetic history, the kindle, the kind of genetic properties have been set off, and they've actually gone completely psychotic. And they smoked once, or they smoked twice, or whatever, and now suddenly they've developed this mental health problem that they didn't know that would have happened to them. And they will then end up being a psychiatric patient, whether institutionalized or whether just at home, and someone having to look after a person that has schizophrenia, for example. So that's the concern, and that is why, I'll be honest with you, I'm completely against cannabis being legalized, because my major concern is nobody knows in detail the mental health difficulties that people can have, and they are underreported. So even when I talk to teenagers about their cannabis use, and I said, has somebody explained to you that you can go psychotic, or that you don't know your genetic history? They say nobody's ever told them that cannabis can cause psychosis, or it can cause severe mood disorders and that kind of thing. So that's why, for me, it's quite clear that it's actually dangerous, because it's completely unmonitored. Yeah.
Yes. For me, I think the part that I would want to engage on is the issue of society. The theme that Sean is referring to, there is no holiness but social holiness. And we were targeting drugs. But I must be honest that in trying to read before this conversation, really weed, it's not 100% fit in the category of drugs that are really destroying our society. I do accept the notion that it does have potential, depending on the usage of it. As you are saying, that you can start using it not knowing your genetic history and all that. So it becomes then difficult to really tell a person who you say he's got an issue of anxiety, to say don't use it. because, as she has said, there's no really scientific proof of the end results of it all, you know. But what I can say from the experience, observation, and some reading is that it is, right, a gateway, as we said earlier on, but also most of the time they don't use it by itself. They put they mix with cocaine, sometimes they mix it with Mendrax, whatever, even nyawupe, what we call nyawupe today, it's mixed with it. So you find that the people who are using it, sometimes they are not only using it most of the time, because obviously they want to reach a certain level, high level of being drugged, you know. So you find that they don't only use it. For me, that's the problem. If it's going to be out in the street, what it's going to be used with? That is my other problem. Because also there are things, I think now with what we umhlonyana, the weed in rural areas, it just grows. And it's used for other things, not being smoked. Others, they boil it, they drink it for certain illnesses, you know. And it is, as I've said, if you look at it either as a drug, but you can also look at it as also a herb that is really intended to heal, you know, people. So then itself as dacha itself or wheat itself, it's very difficult to just pick it and say this is the drug that can destroy society. But because of the desperation of the society, of young people, of many other social issues, because for me, most of these things and most of this situation in which we experience with people who are addicted in drugs is because of societal issues. And we know how does that affect from the child when they are born, if they're not groomed properly, if they've got that void in their lives, not cared for. We know how broken families are and all those. So they want anything that will take them out of their current pain, emotions, struggles, poverty that they are currently experiencing. So for me, I'm not condoning it, but I'm trying to say that the society which is engaged, particular young people who are engaged in drugs, that society is doomed.
Not really.
Never.
My family probably has a more laid-back approach with this kind of thing. So weed or even drinking, for example, there's always been a be responsible kind of attitude. So if you try it, don't go overboard kind of thing. Yeah, and just be careful, like use it responsibly. From the church, probably if I had to think about the general response to it, is more of a be careful when and how you do it.
No one has ever told me about that thing. You see, this is the thing about living in the hood. When you're living in the hood, you can actually see everything with your own eyes, and you can actually teach yourself about those things by watching people around you doing those things. So for me personally, no one has ever told me that. I just looked and learned those things myself.
I've never had people talk about it, about weed, and my parents have always had weed up there as a big no-no, as it is a big gateway to bigger things, and that you should never do weed in your life. And my friends, on the other hand, that they're more open to weed and more willing to try it. So yeah, I kind of have both sides of people telling me it's good and people telling me it's bad at the same time.
I have never received teachings about weed, but my grandfather had a weed garden. And so he used to tell us about the weed itself and why he grows it and how it grows. And in actual fact, I learned through him that, because he used to then start to sing and mellow down and just be a nice person when he was on weed. So that's as much education that I have on weed.
There's something that both of you touched on, and that is Christine, you touched on the legalization of it. And I want to come back to that in just a second. And you spoke about the societal effects of it. But something we picked up when we were doing the street interviews is often when we asked people, have you ever been taught about this issue? Most people said no. Those that said yes said, yeah, I was taught it's illegal and it's wrong. But there was never any reason given to why it is wrong or why I shouldn't do it or what it could do to me beyond it's illegal. So in September 2018, it becomes legal for someone to grow it at home for personal consumption. And so now we have the legal factor out the window within certain circumstances. And then we now also have a generation that no longer accepts the binary stance of it's wrong, don't do it. How do we teach about this? What is it that we now say to our young people? Because we no longer can say it's illegal. We no longer can say it's wrong under all circumstances, because it's exactly what you've said. There is medicinal usage for it, and there's often different ways it's been used, and there's a lot of different aspects that come into this discussion. How do we respond as a church? Do we condemn it as a blanket? Do we condone it under all circumstances? Or how do we teach, and what do we teach about this issue?
Well, I can say I personally agree that you can't just say to a teenager, something is wrong. I think everybody deserves a rationale. Everything needs an explanation. And I think why I think that is so important, there's no education in saying to somebody something is wrong. There's no thinking involved. There's no personal accountability. Whereas if you explain all the different viewpoints, whether it's the positives and the advantages of anything, and you explain the disadvantages and the social consequences and the medical consequences and the mental health consequences, then the onus is on the adolescent to sit with the complexity, to actually say, I need to take ownership of what I put into my body, what I expose myself to. I need to be able to start holding the complexity of my personal decisions, my personal morality, my personal commitment to other people and myself. So I definitely think there shouldn't be a kind of rigid, no, it's wrong, because that sort of absolves people from taking the responsibility to engage with the complexity of life. So if I had my way, which obviously I don't because it's not the case, I would say that adolescents should be taught this. Alongside, we have sex education in schools. I think there should be education on mental health issues, drugs, medicinal properties of each drug, because even the narcotics that are illegal, so for example, heroin, for example, cocaine, all of them actually started off as medicine. So if you go Western medicine, so if you go back in time, it would have been opium and it would have been used to solve problems. Freud himself took cocaine medicinally, only then to realize later that in actual fact it's got other negative fallouts. So this is the thing that the teenagers and people do not know, that there's all drugs which are now called narcotics, which are illegal because of the negative fallouts, the very severe negative fallouts, originally were used and discovered for medicinal purposes. Only then over time to realize, hold on a second, with the positive outcomes comes the very real negative outcomes, hence the monitoring of morphine even. Even some of our psychiatric drugs that the psychiatrists prescribe have different levels of availability. So you got Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 and so forth, because it's monitored. So when we talk about people becoming addicted, people can become addicted to legal drugs as well. So for example, sleeping tablets can be just as dangerous as, for example, cannabis. So this is the kind of thing that I feel that adolescents need to be exposed to. So it should be in our curriculum, properly explained, alongside contraception and alongside pregnancy risks, alongside sexually transmitted diseases, and it's not. I think there should be a lack of stigmatization of psychiatric difficulties so that people can come into contact with people that innocently thought, oh, this is part of fun, and me being a teenager and me experimenting and me transgressing some of the rigidity that I feel that I'm in, only to realize later that it actually wrecked their future. So these kind of engagements with people that have unfortunately encountered the real negative consequences of cannabis or any drug, that kind of exposure would be important. I remember when I was at school, a drug addict or a former drug addict came to the school to explain this is how it started out. So this is why these forums, even this forum, is so important, because it's not saying no for the sake of saying no. It's saying, are you aware of the outcomes? So I think that that's quite important.
No. For me, I think that from the church point of view, we must stop demonizing everything. You know, one, I believe that God created everything beautiful, and He created all things for a certain purpose. But I think sometimes we get lazy to engage even our own scriptures in terms of what are the purpose of the things that God has created. In this particular context, maybe even in the topics that you have addressed, you grow up thinking that sex is evil. You know, you don't even think about it. Only when you get married. What if you don't get married? You know, so there are so many things. I think this is one of the subject. I look at even in the scriptures that you referred. Those scriptures are really condemning that the devil, I think it's Peter, is roaming around. So if we can maybe start from there. And then secondly, acknowledge that this is something that it's been created part of the society, identify the negatives and the positives, and engage them. Engage young people. Allow such discussion in church forums, you know, because we tend to speak about the New Jerusalem, the roads of gold, but they are not here now. The young people are challenged by these drugs in society, at schools, wherever they go. So how can the church be a platform or create a platform where young people are honestly engaged? For me, I think we must be honest. You need to get expertise on this subject and engage them within the church. Don't say it is something for the parents or something for the schools. It is a subject for the church. So for me, if you ask what the church should do, I think one, it should stop demonizing it, everything that they disagree with. Rather, welcome different opinions, different views, different experiences. Even embrace those who are already addicted. Don't say it is their own doing, you know, because as I've said earlier on, people are pushed to these things. You know, anyone who engaged in a substance, it's because there is a void. Whether we agree with it or whether we disagree, whether others were able to overcome it, it's not here nor there. But as soon as someone becomes vulnerable in any addiction, it could be sex addiction, it is become then our responsibility to show grace and love. So for me, if we can look at the people that we call para, those who lie by the street lights, those that when we give them money, we know they're going to go and buy certain drugs to sustain themselves. At that particular, we must be able to reach out to them so that we can be able to have a testimony as the church to say that they were there, but now the grace that we are preaching has led them here. So for me, we must be able to be a church that when they engage societal issues, we just stop demonizing everything, but allow that the grace. Because I always say, if myself, I grew up with people who are smoking, I tried it at some point in my life. So if I was able to be saved, then anyone else can be. But we must be able to be the channel of that grace.
Great, thank you so much. We know that there are other implications on society as far as weed is concerned, and there are ways of also protecting ourselves from these impacts that have not been explored? Two different questions. One, Christine, you at some point spoke about the research that has been done in Amsterdam, where young people are not so now keen to do their schoolwork, go to work, etc. And so one can imagine that this has other impacts, like the economy. It would have an impact on the economy, because if we're going to recover from our debt, we need young people with a strong sense of motivation to go to work and to go to school. So I just want to throw that to you. You can think about it. And then, Reverend Mtembu, just one thing I also want to throw out to you then is the whole thing of with weed. So Christine speaks about something very important, that it's possible that two young people smoke weed together, but something would be triggered in the one and something that's not triggered in the other because of one's genetic composition. Are there other things that we could explore in engaging that? Because, for instance, the first thing that usually comes into mind is that within African systems of knowledge, there is always this idea that there are things that your family does not engage in, because it is known that in your family it does other stuff. And I suppose we've got that comes from the benefit of having a strong sense of community and being able to trace and locate everyone. Is there anything like that we can explore? But let me just, in that order.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned the economic framework, because this is what, and maybe this is something that is worth considering, is who is benefiting from the legalization of cannabis. Was there proper engagement with the positive, negative outcomes, the actual social outcomes of cannabis before it was legalized? And my concern is when they put through that constitutional legislation, there was not enough expertise on the panel. So there was the people that were advocating for the legalization, and they're making a huge amount of money from the selling and the growing of cannabis. So we've got to think a little bit more broader than this is actually an economic company or an economic benefit for a number of people that are not necessarily vulnerable to the negative outcomes. So they've been smoking cannabis for however long, and then they saw that it's a lovely economic enterprise for them to formalize it and to make a lot of money from it, a lot of money from the legalization. So they obviously pulled in constitutional rights to individual choice, and so this bill was passed with that kind of lobby behind it, but nobody wants to talk about that lobby. The people that are making money from cannabis being legalized. And I'm not talking about the grower in the Eastern Cape that sells it on the unofficial informal market. I'm talking about the official market where you can now literally walk into certain, kind of stores and they say, here's this product with cannabis in it and this product. I'm talking about the formal market. Those people are the commercialization of cannabis. That was passed from a particular lobby, and that lobby was not also, there wasn't a lobby saying, but what is the medical implications or the psychiatric fallout for vulnerable people? And that's my issue. Also with the legalization, there wasn't enough sufficient stakeholders to say, hold on a second, we are going to lose a percentage of our young population to this drug. If we look at internationally, we've got developed countries like the Netherlands that are worried that a significant proportion of their young adults are not ever going to be able to function in society. Rather, they're now having to build psychiatric facilities for them to survive. And that is a problem, whereas that was not explored in the lobbies that happened around the constitutional legalization of that. So there was not enough stakeholder involvement, or should I say varied stakeholder involvement. But rather the people that were very familiar with individual rights were quick to say, let's just legalize it. And so that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, I think, Sean, I think the most critical thing with what you call African indigenous knowledge is that obviously it's passed from generation to generation. And we all know that some of it is not really written or even scientific proven in the way we understand science today. So it is very difficult to know. Our grandparents in the olden days, they will die without being even diagnosed what exactly killed them. It could be witchcraft, it could be many things that it was happening in that particular community. But as I've said right from the beginning, that from the African perspective, when you look at cannabis, dacha, and whatever you call it, it is not just a drug. I want to emphasize that it is not just smoked. It's when you have certain flus. You boil it with water, you drink it. You don't get hallucination or something like that. So from that perspective, and also from the biblical perspective, I'll make an example with aloe. Aloe is very critical for Africans. Every home must have aloe. Now you are buying it. It's very expensive. You buy water now for about 30 rand, something that you could have just got it from your garden, boil it. So there are things that I think we need as the society, particularly those who are doing research, to be kind of consistent in discovering some of the things that are happening in throughout the world, in our communities as well, and be able to ask ourselves a question: how do we reintroduce, so that the part of education to our young people, it's not one-sided. It's not that just a drug that you smoke, that you get addicted, and therefore it can cause you cancer, it can cause you a mental breakdown, and but also how it's been used before, as how communities used it before. How come it was not dangerous to use it before, and why it's been now manipulated? Because that's what I was going to say as my closing, that unfortunately everything that we live with, that God created us to live with, whether it's animals, you hear rhino poaching, people they manipulate for their own capitalist advancements, their own financial advancements. So what the doc is saying is that if the debate is going to be about money, we are not going to win, because clearly anything that is pushed from the financial advancement point of view, it get passed, because as she's saying that there are people who are gaining out of it. So we need, as a society, from my point of view, if we talk about Ubuntu, if we talk about African regeneration, if we talk about Ubele Masiswen, going back to our roots, we need to discover all these plans, all these things that we are blessed with, and ask the question: what is their designed purpose of creation? And stop manipulating nature in order to fit in our own selfish desires.
Thank you. You've given us a lot to think about, both of you. So thank you very much for joining us. Then we will be wrapping up this episode. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We've really enjoyed this conversation. We have learned a lot. I think you've highlighted different aspects for us that I've never thought about. And I think some of our youth may benefit greatly, and a lot of our people watching from home. And so thank you, everyone, for joining us for tonight, and also for joining us for this series. We hope it's been a great series for you as we've explored how far is too far. And so we wish you all the best for this week. And please don't forget to join us for our Tuesday chat Bible study this coming week, Tuesday at 7:30. We'll see you there.